Jacksonville never forgot the murder of Dana Weller. For 33 years, her name was shorthand for an open wound the city stopped expecting to heal. And now, after all that time, detectives say they have the man responsible. The Ortega River breathed up humid air. The Cedar Hills cul-de-sac smelled like wet concrete and lawn clippings. A porch light hummed with river gnats. Sprinklers hissed over Saint Augustine grass. 6:02 a.m. A man in a faded work shirt stepped onto his small front porch with a steaming mug and a trash bag. Robert Bobby Cates, forklift operator, divorced, 2 grown sons who no longer visited, 33 years in Jacksonville without a serious mark on his record. He looked like anyone's neighbor. He was everyone's neighbor. He set the mug on the railing, popped the trash bin lid, and let the cup slip from his fingers. It hit the concrete, rolled, and stopped. Sergeant Paul Hanley watched from an unmarked SUV half a block away. The man beside him, Detective Sherry Vega, held a radio between her knees, counting quietly under her breath. Hanley's watchband creaked as he raised a hand. Now. Doors opened in unison. Sheriff's office. Do not move. Cates froze, eyes narrowing, pupils shrinking against the flood of headlights. 6:03. Cuffs clicked. Neighbors peeked through blinds. A jogger slowed on the sidewalk, phone raised, unsure what they were seeing. It looked like a drug raid. It wasn't. It was the end of one of Florida's longest unsolved homicides. At the sheriff's office, the booking officer barely spoke. The weight of the moment was enough. Cates's mugshot showed a man who looked exhausted, not angry. Expression blank, eyes unreadable. Inside the cold case unit, the evidence board told a story that only the detectives could read, a web of photographs, documents, and printed genealogy trees. The link between Cates and the 1992 murder of Dana Weller didn't come from confession, rumor, or coincidence. It came from science. A coffee cup tossed in a trash can, a scrap of DNA preserved under fingernails, a chain of relatives who had uploaded their family data online, never knowing the ripples it would create. It began a year earlier in Tallahassee, inside the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's DNA lab, a bright room humming with refrigerated units and sequencers that sounded like slow, mechanical heartbeats. Mariah Cantu, then 28, had volunteered for the agency's new cold case pilot, Project Resolve. She was young, methodical, and believed in the idea that science could outlast even the best lies. The Weller case file was the second one she opened. Inside, an old envelope marked Evidence Item 14, a fingernail scrapings, victim. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but when she peeled back the tape, the sterile packet inside was still intact. Under a microscope, she could see the tiny fragment of preserved tissue. It was smaller than a grain of sand, almost invisible. But in that speck was an entire human signature waiting to speak. Cantu thawed it carefully, followed updated extraction protocols, and fed the sample into the sequencer. The machine whirred for hours. Then, a faint green waveform appeared on her monitor, full, readable, complete. A full genetic profile. The system automatically ran a search against CODIS, the national database. Result: no match. Cates had never been arrested for a qualifying offense. He'd slipped between the cracks. But Project Resolve wasn't built to stop there. It was designed for the cases that CODIS couldn't solve. Cantu uploaded the profile to a public genealogy site used by investigators nationwide. The algorithm compared thousands of shared DNA segments. 2 faint links appeared second cousins in Georgia, each sharing a small genetic overlap with the unknown contributor. To most, that data would mean nothing. To Cantu, it was a starting point. She built a digital family tree backward from those cousins through birth certificates, marriage licenses, obituaries, census scans. Dozens of branches, hundreds of names. And one line kept reappearing: Cates. The tree converged in Duval County. The birth year matched, the geography matched, the bloodlines matched. When she cross-referenced with property records from the early 90s, her pulse quickened. The name Robert Cates appeared on a lease for a duplex on Herschel Street, the same block where Dana Weller had lived when she was murdered. That was the moment she took her glasses off and sat still for a full minute. Science had done what memory couldn't. She printed the file and carried it down the hallway to Sergeant Hanley. "You're going to want to see this," she said. Hanley read the summary twice, then looked up slowly. He lived next door to her? 2 doors down. Hanley nodded once, the way someone does when they realize the impossible might finally be ending. Within an hour, a task force was formed. Old records were rechecked. Surveillance teams were organized. Cates became the quiet center of an operation 33 years in the making. He worked nights at a shipping warehouse, ate lunch in his truck. He went home alone, always the same route, always the same stop for coffee. The goal wasn't confrontation, it was confirmation. When the team watched him toss that styrofoam cup into a public bin, they moved fast. It was collected, sealed, and rushed to Tallahassee. 9 days later, the results arrived. Match. Probability of error, less than 1 in 200 trillion. Hanley got the call while driving. He pulled to the shoulder, engine still running, phone pressed to his ear. "You're certain?" he asked. "Absolutely certain," Cantu said. "It's him." The arrest plan took shape quietly. Only 5 people knew the exact date and time. June 12th, exactly 33 years since Dana vanished. They wanted symmetry, not for drama, for justice. Cates's house was small, 1 story, beige stucco. The blinds always half drawn. The neighbors thought he worked too much, kept to himself, owned a cat that they never saw but sometimes heard. At dawn, Hanley parked 2 houses down. He checked his watch, 6:01. Sprinklers clicked on across the street, mist rising like smoke. Inside the SUV, the radio crackled. Target in motion. Cates opened his door, stepped out, and looked toward the trash bins. The world didn't feel cinematic. It felt heavy, inevitable. When they moved, it was silent boots on wet concrete, the faint buzz of power lines overhead. "Sheriff's office." Cates turned. The mug dropped. Coffee spilled into the gutter, steam curling upward in the humid air. For a second, nobody breathed. Then Hanley's voice cut through. "You're under arrest for the murder of Dana Weller." Cates didn't argue, didn't protest, didn't ask who that was. He just said, "I figured this day would come." By mid-morning, the Jacksonville media had it. Cold case solved, Ortega River murder, linked to neighbor after 33 years. Helicopters hovered over the Cedar Hills neighborhood. Reporters stood in front of yellow tape that wasn't even for this scene but looked close enough for television. Former classmates, teachers, and neighbors called the station phones nonstop. Some crying, some furious, some just stunned. That night, every local channel replayed the same footage. Cates being led to a cruiser, head slightly bowed, wrists bound. Underneath, a banner read, "Arrest made in 1992 teacher homicide." Across the state in Ocala, the phone rang at the Weller residence. It was 8:22 in the morning. Diane Weller answered. The detective's voice on the other end was calm but trembling slightly. "Mrs. Weller, we've made an arrest." There was silence. Then, a small sound, the phone hitting the floor. Her son, Chris, picked it up. He didn't ask who. He just whispered, "You got him?" "Yes," the detective said. "It's over." Chris turned toward his mother, who was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the window. The morning sun had just begun to hit the garden Dana used to help her plant. "She's free now," Diane said softly. "She can rest." At the sheriff's office, Cates sat in an interrogation room. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A styrofoam cup of water sat untouched in front of him, an irony not lost on anyone in the room. Hanley walked in, set a folder on the table, and opened it. Photos of Dana, the genealogy chart, the DNA report. He spoke gently, like someone addressing a ghost. "Bobby, we've got your DNA under her fingernails. That doesn't happen by accident." Cates didn't look up. He traced a circle on the table with one finger. After a long pause, he said, "She shouldn't have screamed." Hanley looked at him for a long time. "That's not something an innocent man says." Cates didn't respond. He stared past Hanley at the blank wall, eyes unfocused, as if replaying something only he could see. He never confessed outright, but he didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than words ever could. By afternoon, the case file was officially reclassified from cold case, unsolved, to closed with arrest. Inside the evidence vault, the original envelope, item 14A, was logged out for the last time. Chain of custody, complete. Cantu signed it personally, her hands shaking just slightly. She looked down at the packet that had started it all. A half-gram of biological dust. 33 years of silence turned into proof. Science had done what witness memories couldn't. Outside, the heat rose off the asphalt. Cicadas buzzed, reporters swarmed. Hanley leaned against his car, collar unbuttoned, the weight of the morning settling in. A rookie detective walked over. "Sir, how's it feel?" Hanley took a breath. Like someone finally kept a promise. That night, the local news aired a special report. Archival footage filled the screen: the Ortega River in '92, the candlelight vigil, a mother crying in front of cameras. Then, the present-day shot, a mug hitting concrete in slow motion, the arrest, the headline: DNA breakthrough, leads to justice. The anchor's voiceover was steady. For 3 decades, Jacksonville asked one question: who killed teacher Dana Weller? Tonight, that question has an answer: sex. In living rooms across the city, viewers watched in silence. Some cried. Some whispered finally. A few streets away from where Dana had lived, an older woman stepped onto her porch and placed a single candle on the railing. It flickered in the humid night air, its small flame reflected in the windows of the house next door, the one where Robert Cates had lived all those years ago. But inside the cold case office, the feeling wasn't triumph. It was something quieter. Hanley turned off the lights, stood by the evidence board, and stared at Dana's photo one last time. He thought about all the names written beneath hers: detectives who'd tried and failed, officers who'd retired, leads that had gone nowhere. They had all added one thread. Now, finally, the tapestry made sense. He picked up the phone and called Cantu. "You did it," he said. She laughed, tired. "No, she did. She fought back. She held on to that evidence for us." Hanley smiled. "You're right, she did." 6:02 a.m. The mug slips. 6:03. The cuffs click. A quiet street. A single sound. A story 33 years in the making finally exhales. If you like cases where one overlooked clue flips a whole town, you're in the right place. But to understand this moment, to understand how a scrap of DNA and a mother's patience could outlast everything else, we need to go back to where it began. Back to 1992. Back to the teacher, the trail, and the night Jacksonville lost its sense of safety. To understand the shock of that arrest, you have to understand Dana Weller and the Jacksonville she called home. It was the summer of 1992, the kind where the air never cooled off, just shifted from hot to humid. Jacksonville was growing, but it still felt like a large town pretending to be a city. The skyline was half-built glass, the bridges still new steel. Everywhere smelled like salt water and gasoline. Riverside, Dana's neighborhood, sat near the Ortega River, a stretch of calm water lined with mossy oaks and cracked sidewalks. People waved when they passed each other. Everyone had a church, a barbecue place, and a favorite local anchor on the evening news. Dana fit right into that picture. She was 27, with brown hair she always wore tied up, and the kind of easy smile that made people want to talk to her. She taught 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary, the same school she'd student taught in after college. Her classroom was on the 2nd floor, room 206, bright and cluttered with construction paper art. She kept a Polaroid camera in her desk drawer, snapping photos of her students' projects for the hallway bulletin board. She called them "my kids." Her fellow teachers said she was the first one in each morning, the last to leave. She ran on caffeine and sticky notes. Her desk was organized chaos, stacks of spelling tests, half-finished lesson plans, and a small ceramic frog holding paper clips. Outside of work, Dana lived in a 1-bedroom apartment overlooking the Ortega River. It wasn't much beige carpet, thrift store furniture, but she loved it. She'd saved for months to buy a used kayak, something she could drag down the embankment after school. Her parents visited once and said they'd never seen her so proud. She called her mom every Sunday, like clockwork, usually while folding laundry. Her father, a retired firefighter, said those calls were his favorite part of the week. She'd tell us what her students said that week, usually something that cracked her up, and it was like she was still our little girl. Dana's world was small, but full. Every morning she'd stop at the same gas station on Park Street for coffee, chat with the cashier, and wave to the crossing guard by the school entrance. On weekends, she jogged the loop along the Riverwalk, 2.5 miles, headphones in, ponytail swinging. It was her ritual, her alone time. People noticed her routine because she did it like clockwork every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday around 6 p.m. If you lived nearby, you saw her. You didn't need to know her name to know the jogger in the white tank top who smiled when she passed. That was Jacksonville back then. Everyone was a little familiar. The early 90s had a certain rhythm car radios playing Garth Brooks, corner diners serving black coffee in chipped mugs, kids riding bikes until dark. The evening news opened with local anchors in padded shoulder suits, talking about heat indexes and high school football scores. It wasn't perfect, but it felt safe. That sense of safety would vanish on a Friday in June. When Dana didn't show up for her friends' dinner plans that night, it seemed strange but not alarming. When she didn't answer her phone by 10, people began to worry. By midnight, worry turned to panic. Before that night, the idea that someone could be abducted, killed in Riverside felt impossible. Jacksonville had its share of crime, but not there, not her. Her principal, Susan Aldridge, said later, "You don't think bad things happen to people like Dana. She was the kind of person who stayed after class to help kids finish their art projects. It just didn't make sense." Detectives would later note that her life left no easy suspects, no jealous ex, no debts, no double life. She was the definition of ordinary goodness, and that, in some ways, made the crime even harder to grasp. Because if it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. After the murder, the community would turn Dana into something like a symbol: the smiling teacher frozen in her yearbook photo, the face on posters taped to grocery store windows. But back then, she wasn't a symbol. She was just Dana, a 27-year-old woman who loved her students, her quiet apartment, and the feeling of wind on her face as she jogged along the Ortega River. That Friday started like all the others: coffee at the gas station, laughter in the teacher's lounge, a long goodbye to her students as summer began. She even told a coworker she was planning a beach trip that weekend. No one who saw her that morning could have guessed it would be her last day alive. The sun rose on Jacksonville like any other June morning. The air shimmered, the river glistened. Life went on. And somewhere in that same neighborhood, someone was already watching her. Friday, June 12, 1992. The last day of the school year. For the students at Riverside Elementary, it was Freedom Day: backpacks empty, report cards stuffed into folders, the promise of endless summer ahead. For Dana Weller, it was satisfaction wrapped in exhaustion. She arrived at school just after 7 a.m., wearing a floral blouse and the same silver necklace she wore every day. She signed in at the front office, waved to the janitor, and unlocked room 206 for the final time that year. By 2 p.m., she'd stacked the last of her textbooks in neat piles and taped a note to her desk that read, "See you in August." The end of the day passed in a blur of hugs, photos, and handmade cards. One student handed her a small gift bag with a coffee mug inside painted in wobbly blue letters, "World's Best Teacher." At 2:30, Dana left the parking lot, her Civic loaded with classroom supplies. Security footage from the gas station on Park Street caught her 10 minutes later. She filled her tank, bought a bottle of water, and chatted with the cashier about the heat. She seemed relaxed, happy, normal. At 3, she stopped by her apartment. A neighbor remembered hearing her stereo playing soft rock, windows open. Dana changed into running clothes: purple shorts, white tank top, gray sneakers. She tied her hair back, locked her front door, and stepped out for her evening jog. The sun was still heavy in the sky, turning the Ortega River into a sheet of orange glass. Several witnesses later placed her along her usual route down Herschel Street, past the Riverside Park tennis courts, onto the shaded riverwalk that curved behind a row of apartment buildings. One man walking his dog remembered her passing him near the boat ramp around 6:15. "She smiled," he said, "like she always did. Nothing strange, just another evening." At 6:30, a jogger heading in the opposite direction saw someone else on the trail, a man standing near the tree line, smoking. She couldn't describe him clearly, only that he wore a dark t-shirt and jeans, out of place among the walkers and runners. It was still light when Dana turned the last corner of her loop, the stretch where the sidewalk meets the gravel trail. After that, nothing certain. At 7:15, her friend Julie Evans called. They had dinner plans at a small Italian restaurant downtown. No answer. Julie assumed Dana was in the shower, maybe running late. At 8, She called again, straight to voicemail. By 9:30, Julie drove to Dana's apartment. Her car wasn't there. The porch light was off. Julie left a note on the door. "Call me when you get home, getting worried." At 10, she called again. Still nothing. She tried to convince herself it was fine. Dana might have gone to the movies, or met someone from work. Maybe her phone battery died. It was 1992, people missed calls all the time. But by midnight, the worry felt different. Julie called Dana's parents in Ocala. They hadn't heard from her. She called the police, but dispatch said to wait until morning. At dawn, the phone rang again, this time from a man named Larry Stevens, who lived across from Riverside Park. He told police he'd found a silver Honda Civic parked near the trail entrance. The driver's door was unlocked. The keys were still in the ignition. A purse sat on the passenger seat. The responding officer, Patrolman Gordon, arrived at 6:45. He opened the door carefully, using a pen to lift the handle. Inside, he found Dana's wallet, driver's license, and a half-empty water bottle. No signs of struggle, just eerie stillness. The car was towed for processing. Officers taped off the area and began a slow grid search of the surrounding park. At 7:20, a K-9 unit arrived. They started near the trailhead, working toward the river. By 8:15, the dog stopped near a patch of woods behind the picnic area. There, half buried in pine needles, lay one of Dana's gray running shoes. The laces were torn. Detectives called in the crime scene unit. They photographed the shoe, bagged it, and began combing the surrounding ground for prints or fibers. The search would stretch through the day. Volunteers joining from across the neighborhood. Teachers, parents, joggers, even off-duty firefighters. The heat climbed into the 90s. The river shimmered. Reporters started to arrive by noon. The story already spreading across local radio. Missing schoolteacher, last seen jogging near the river. At first, people thought it was just another missing persons case. Maybe she'd been abducted, maybe she'd run off. But in Jacksonville, people didn't vanish. Not women like Dana. That evening, the sun set red over the water. Searchers lit flashlights, calling her name. One of them said later that the quiet between those shouts was the worst part the moment you realized she wasn't going to answer. That was the end of her last normal day. Everything after that was noise, panic, and fear. The morning of June 13th, 1992, broke heavy and still. A thick line of fog hung low over the Ortega River. It muted everything: the hum of traffic, the shouts of the volunteers, even the distant bark of police dogs. At 7:30, a fisherman named Carl Donnelly launched his small aluminum boat from the ramp near Riverside Park. He'd been following the news all night on the radio. A missing teacher, car left unlocked, running shoe found by the trail. He didn't know her, but his daughter went to Riverside Elementary. He wanted to help. He steered slowly downriver, scanning the bank for anything out of place. Plastic bottles, logs, shoes. Around 8:15, near a bend where the trees crowd close to the water, he saw something pale caught in the reeds. At first he thought it was a plastic bag. Then he saw hair. He called out, no response. His hands shook as he cut the motor and drifted closer. What he found there would end the search and begin the nightmare. Police arrived minutes later. The area was sealed off. Yellow tape stretched from tree to tree, fluttering in the damp wind. The body was found face down in shallow water, partially obscured by branches. She was still wearing a white tank top. Her other shoe was missing. A detective knelt in the mud beside her and whispered, "We found her." By noon, every major local station had broken the story. Body found near Ortega River, believed to be missing teacher Dana Weller. Reporters gathered at the edge of the crime scene, cameras aimed toward the trail. Viewers watching at home saw flashes of blue uniforms, white evidence markers, and a cluster of umbrellas shielding the forensic team from the sun. Detective Lieutenant Mark Pritchard, lead investigator, gave a short statement. "Identification is pending, but we are treating this as a homicide." For Jacksonville, that word homicide hit like a lightning strike. The city hadn't seen a case like this in years, not in Riverside, not to someone like her. At the crime scene, evidence technicians worked methodically. They photographed every inch of the riverbank, collected fibers from branches, and marked a faint set of footprints that led down the slope. The prints stopped near where the body had been. In the victim's clenched right hand, they found small traces of skin later confirmed to be from another person. That detail would become everything. The autopsy would show bruising consistent with a struggle. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head. The time of death placed her killing within an hour of her run. No sign of sexual assault, no robbery. Her keys and jewelry were intact. That made it worse because it suggested something personal. Detectives canvassed the area, knocking on doors, talking to joggers, park workers, anyone who might have seen something. One woman said she'd heard shouting around 6:30, followed by what she thought was a car door slamming. She couldn't describe anyone clearly, only that she saw a man walking fast toward the street, head down, dark hair. Another witness, an older man fishing near the bridge, reported seeing a silver car parked near the trees earlier than usual that night. He assumed it was Dana's, but he couldn't be sure. By evening, police had secured her apartment. Inside, nothing was disturbed. Her bed was made, mail stacked neatly on the counter. But on her desk sat her diary open to a half-written page dated 2 days earlier. It read, "He came by again. I told him to stop. I don't know what else to say without making it worse." The rest of the page had been torn out. That single missing page would haunt the investigation for decades. Back at the station, detectives divided leads. They looked into Dana's co-workers, ex-boyfriends, and parents of students. Everyone was questioned. Everyone was cleared. The first 48 hours produced more confusion than clarity. The only solid evidence, that scrap of skin under her nails, was sent to the state crime lab. But in 1992, DNA testing was slow, imprecise, and often inconclusive. Results could take months, and even then, they rarely led anywhere without a suspect to compare. Still, Detective Pritchard kept that envelope sealed and labeled, vowing it would never be lost. "If we can't get him now," he told a local reporter, "maybe one day we will." Outside, the community began to grieve in real time. That night, parents held their children tighter. Runners stayed off the Riverwalk. A candlelight vigil formed on the steps of Riverside Elementary. Photographs from that evening show a sea of small faces, Dana's students holding candles in paper cups. Teachers stood behind them, arms linked, trying not to cry. Her mother, Carol, stood at the front, holding a framed photo of her daughter. "She just wanted to teach," she said. "That's all she ever wanted." The following Sunday, the church bells at street marks tolled 27 times, one for each year of Dana's life. And somewhere in Jacksonville, the person who had ended it watched all of this unfold. In the first 48 hours, detectives fielded over 200 tips. By the end of the week, it was 500. People swore they'd seen suspicious cars, men loitering near payphones, a jogger in a dark sweatshirt. Most leads went nowhere. Detective Lieutenant Mark Pritchard held daily press briefings outside headquarters, his face growing more drawn each day. "We're following every credible lead," he said. "We believe someone in this community knows something." Behind him, a poster board displayed Dana's photo and a hotline number. Inside the department, the case had already consumed an entire task force. 20 detectives worked in shifts, cross-referencing alibis, interviewing anyone with even a loose connection. They mapped the timeline minute by minute from Dana leaving school to the moment her car was found. Every second accounted for, except the one that mattered most: her final 3 minutes. What happened between that last corner on the Riverwalk and the place she was found downstream? Theories flooded in: a transient, a stalker, a jealous lover, someone she knew, someone random. The noise was deafening. Even small details turned into neighborhood folklore. Someone claimed they saw her talking to a man in a pickup truck 2 days earlier. Another said she'd argued with someone on the phone. Police checked phone records, canvassed the riverfront businesses, pulled receipts. Nothing fit cleanly. The one piece of physical evidence, the skin under her fingernails, remained the only tangible thread. Detectives sent it to the state lab in Tallahassee, where analysts warned it might take months to process. The technology was new, expensive, and slow. In the meantime, Riverside tried to keep living. But you could feel the shift everywhere. Children walked to school in pairs. Joggers carried whistles and pepper spray. The chatter at diners, churches, and gas stations circled back to one topic. Did they catch him yet? No one said his name. There wasn't one yet, just him. The faceless man by the river. The Weller family stayed mostly out of public view. Dana's parents returned to Ocala after the funeral, too overwhelmed to stay in Jacksonville. Her brother, Chris, remained behind, meeting with detectives weekly, pressing for answers. Reporters caught up with him outside the police station once. He said, You don't move on from something like this, you just wait. By late June, the case had become a pressure cooker. Detectives questioned several men who'd lived near the river, a mechanic, a college student, a park groundskeeper. Each time the local news hinted at a possible suspect, rumors ignited. Each time the person was cleared, the rumor didn't quite die. One man, a 30-year-old maintenance worker named Dennis Clay, became the focus of public suspicion after a witness claimed to see him near the trail that night. He was arrested on unrelated charges, breaking and entering, and his name hit the papers. But his DNA didn't match. He was released a week later. His life never recovered. The community's fear was starting to look like hysteria. At City Hall, the mayor held a press conference flanked by police brass. "We will not rest until this murderer is brought to justice," he said. "No resource will be spared." A reward fund was created, $5,000 for information leading to an arrest. Calls poured in. Most were useless. A few hinted at something darker, whispers that Dana had confided in someone about being followed. Detectives dug into her personal life again, combing through diary entries, letters, phone records. That missing page from her diary haunted them. The last line she wrote, "I told him to stop." Who was him? Her coworkers said she'd mentioned a man from the neighborhood who made her uneasy, but she'd brushed it off, saying he was probably harmless. No one could remember a name. By early July, leads were drying up. The Riverwalk reopened, but the crowds didn't come back. The posters on telephone poles curled in the heat. The hotline rang less often. The case that had consumed Jacksonville was starting to fade, at least in public. Inside the sheriff's office, though, it still burned. Detectives refused to box it up. They stored every report, every interview, every Polaroid. Pritchard made sure the physical evidence, the hair samples, the shoe, the fingernail scrapings were preserved carefully. He'd seen too many cold cases lost to bad storage or time. "If we can't find him," he told his team, "we'll make sure someone else can." That vow would outlive him. For now, though, the city moved forward the only way it knew how, quietly, cautiously, pretending things were normal. But under the surface, Jacksonville had changed. The laughter at playgrounds sounded different. The sidewalks felt emptier. The illusion of safety was gone. And for Dana's friends and family, so was peace. By August, the heat had turned brutal. The Ortega River baked under a hard white sky, and the story that once consumed Jacksonville was starting to slip from the front page. The headlines shrank. The reward poster at the gas station peeled at the corners. But inside the sheriff's office, the detectives of the Weller task force were still pushing paper, still making calls, still chasing whispers. And there were plenty of whispers. One tip came from a waitress who said Dana had been meeting someone after work at a diner off Roosevelt Boulevard. The man, she claimed, was older, dark hair, drove a blue truck. Detectives pulled receipts, traced every blue truck registered in the area. No match. Another lead pointed to a man in Dana's apartment complex, a part-time musician who sometimes jogged the same route. His name was Alan Reeves. He'd helped Dana carry groceries once. He was interviewed twice, took a polygraph, and passed. Still, his name stayed in rumor circulation for years. Detectives started mapping out possible suspects by geography. Anyone who lived within a mile of the Riverwalk was on the list. Dozens of names. They interviewed mail carriers, maintenance workers, even teenage boys who mowed lawns along the trail. The descriptions never lined up. One witness swore the man she saw was tall and clean-cut. Another said short and heavy-set. One claimed a mustache. Another said clean-shaven. Composite sketches varied so wildly they could have been different species. By the fall of '92, the case file had tripled in size. Leads blurred together. Notes contradicted notes. Detective Pritchard tried to hold his team together. He met weekly with the Weller family, but each meeting grew harder. Dana's parents were quiet, polite, and visibly aging by the month. Her brother Chris was angry. "You're losing it," he said once. "Whoever did this, he's still out there." Pritchard promised him they hadn't stopped, but even he was starting to feel the wall closing in. The only piece of solid evidence, the partial DNA sample, had come back from the lab. It confirmed a male contributor, but nothing else. In 1992, the technology wasn't advanced enough to identify or even link to anyone without a direct suspect sample. It was a cruel kind of proof. It told them someone existed, but not who. In September, a new rumor spread through Riverside that Dana's murder was connected to another unsolved assault from the previous year. a woman attacked while jogging near the St. John's River. The cases looked similar on paper, but the details didn't align. Still, the gossip took root. Local radio hosts speculated about a serial offender. Newspapers ran side-by-side photos of both victims, asking, could there be a link? Detectives investigated and ruled it out within a week. Different attacker, different evidence, no overlap, but the rumor was faster than the truth. By winter, the case had stalled completely. Pritchard reassigned half his team to newer cases. A small core stayed behind detectives who refused to let it go. They started over from the beginning, rereading every statement, listening to every recorded interview. That's when they noticed a gap. A few early witnesses had mentioned seeing a man near Dana's street in the weeks before her murder. A neighbor described him as quiet, lived a few doors down, drove a dark sedan. The name written on the early canvas log was smudged, nearly unreadable, Cates or Gates. No follow-up report existed, no interview transcript. At the time, it didn't seem suspicious, just another neighbor, possibly out of town. Pritchard jotted a note in the margin, check if still local, but before he could, the case was reprioritized. And that's how it slipped through the cracks. That missing interview, one line of ink on a page, would sit unnoticed for 27 years. Meanwhile, life moved on. Dana's classroom was repainted that summer. A new teacher took over. Her students grew up, graduated, scattered. The park reopened. Families jogged the trail again. But under that normalcy, the memory lingered quiet, unresolved. Every few years, a new detective would reopen the file. They'd find nothing new. Each time, hope dimmed a little more. For the Weller family, holidays became reminders. Dana's mother left her bedroom untouched for a decade. Her brother stopped returning reporters' calls. The case slid from active investigation to cold file. In police storage, the box marked Weller, Dana, the 13th of June 2092, gathered dust. Inside, the paper yellowed. But the envelope labeled nail scrapings remained sealed and frozen, exactly as Pritchard had promised. Years passed. Officers retired. Technology changed. The world moved from rotary phones to smartphones, from VHS tapes to streaming. But Dana's story stayed fixed in time, the same unsolved headline, the same unanswered question. And somewhere in Florida, the man who killed her lived an ordinary life. A job, a house, a routine. He probably thought he'd gotten away with it. He almost had. Time is what kills most investigations. In the Weller file, it just slowed the heartbeat until no one could tell if it was still alive. The 90s rolled on. The detectives who'd worked the scene moved to other cases, other cities, other lives. Lieutenant Mark Pritchard retired in '99, his hair gone gray. He took a box of clippings home and kept Dana's school photo pinned above his workbench. Every few years, a new face would inherit the cold case stack. Each would read the file, trace the same timelines, reach the same wall. They'd send the DNA scrapings to the state lab again, hoping technology had improved enough to make sense of it. Every time the answer came back the same, no match. Meanwhile, Jacksonville changed. The old riverside houses got remodeled. The Riverwalk got a fresh coat of paint. The kids Dana once taught had kids of their own. Her parents aged quietly in Ocala. They stopped doing interviews. Her brother Chris married, then divorced, still living with the ghost of that summer. At Christmas, he'd drive to Jacksonville, park near the old trail, and sit in silence. Every January, the sheriff's office released a short list of unsolved homicides. Dana's name stayed near the top. The stories got shorter, the faces in the newsroom younger. Then came the new millennium. DNA tech exploded. Cold case units reopened files thought unsolvable. Analysts began talking about touch DNA, about profiles built from microscopic traces. But even that needed luck, funding, and someone who cared enough to start the paperwork. In 2010, the Weller case was boxed up again. The label was fading. The manila edges were soft from humidity. In that condition, it stayed for nearly a decade, sealed behind a steel door in the evidence vault at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And then, in 2019, a memo circulated through the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. A new pilot program was forming Project Resolve, pairing detectives with genealogical analysts to retest old evidence. A young crime lab tech named Mariah Cantu volunteered. She was 28, born the year Dana died. Cantu pulled the Weller file as one of her first assignments. "I just remember thinking, she looks like someone I'd know," she said later. She thawed the envelope, rehydrated the scrapings, and ran them through a modern sequencer. The sample was fragile but intact. For the first time, it produced a full genetic profile. When it hit CODIS, the federal database still came up blank. The killer had never been arrested for a qualifying offense, but Cantu wasn't done. She uploaded the profile to a public genealogy site that allowed law enforcement access. Hours later, a faint constellation appeared on her screen, 2 second-cousin matches in Georgia. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Cantu began building a family tree backward from those cousins, using census records, birth certificates, and obituaries. The branches stretched through northern Florida. One surname kept repeating Cates. She highlighted it in yellow. Over the next 2 months, analysts mapped the family forward again, generation by generation, until one name fit the age and geography of their suspect profile, from 1992. Robert Bobby Cates. A warehouse worker, living quietly near Cedar Hills, once a neighbor on Herschel Street just 2 doors down from Dana Weller. The same man whose name had smudged on an old canvas log almost 30 years earlier. When Detective Paul Hanley picked up the folder, he said it felt like the past physically shifted in his hands. The case that had haunted Jacksonville for 3 decades had just exhaled. And for the first time in 33 years, the cold was breaking. It started with a digital tree. A web of names and birth years glowing on a monitor inside the Jacksonville crime lab. The branches spread out from 2 second cousins in Georgia, distant relatives who had uploaded their DNA to a public ancestry site for fun, never imagining it would help solve a murder. At the end of one branch sat a single line that caught analyst Mariah Cantu's eye. Robert Cates, born 1969, Duval County, Florida. She clicked the name, cross-referenced public records, and felt the room go quiet. The address history showed something strange. Herschel Street, Riverside. Just 2 houses away from Dana Weller's last residence. A chill ran through her. She double-checked, then triple-checked. The data held. Cantu printed the file and walked it down to Detective Sergeant Paul Hanley, head of Project Resolve. "You're going to want to see this," she said. Hanley read it twice before speaking. He lived next door to her? 2 doors down, she said. Same block, same time. That was enough to start a background sweep. Robert Bobby Cates, age 56, now living in Cedar Hills. Divorced, employed at the port warehouse, minor traffic violations, no felonies. He'd left Riverside shortly after Dana's murder and bounced around the state for years. To detectives, that kind of movement looked like someone staying 1 step ahead of a memory. They pulled his old driver's license photo from state archives. A younger man, thin, dark hair, the faint smile of someone who'd never been on the wrong side of a badge. Hanley stared at it for a long time. "We finally have a face," he said. But DNA genealogy only points the way. It doesn't convict. To make an arrest, investigators needed a fresh, direct sample from Cates himself, something that could be tested against the genetic profile preserved since 1992. So they began surveillance. 2 detectives parked near his workplace, watching his routine. He clocked in early, ate lunch in his truck, left at 4:30. He lived alone in a 1-story stucco house, beige with peeling trim, blinds always half drawn. Weeks passed. The goal wasn't confrontation, it was collection. In May 2025, the break came. Cates stopped at a gas station before work, drank a cup of coffee, and tossed the empty cup into a public trash can. An officer retrieved it minutes later with gloved hands, sealed it in an evidence bag, and drove straight to the FDLE lab in Tallahassee. The test took 9 days. On June 2nd, the results came back. Match. Probability of error, less than 1 in 200 trillion. Hanley was in the field when he got the call. He pulled his car over, staring at the report on his phone until the screen dimmed. After 33 years, the sample from Dana's fingernails had found its voice, and it was saying one name. That night, the cold case unit met behind closed doors. They spread photos across the table, crime scene shots, maps, genealogy charts, the mug from the gas station. Someone said quietly, "We've got him." They drafted the arrest warrant in silence. Before dawn on June 12th, the same date Dana disappeared all those years ago, they planned the takedown. 2 unmarked vehicles, 4 officers, 1 quiet street. They watched the house for movement. At 6 a.m., Cates stepped outside with his coffee mug, same routine as always. He walked toward his trash bin. That's when Sergeant Hanley gave the signal. "Sheriff's office, don't move." Cates froze, then dropped the mug. The sound of it hitting concrete echoed through the cul-de-sac, a single hollow note marking the end of 3 decades of silence. He didn't resist, didn't ask why. He just said, "I figured this day would come." At the station, he sat under flickering fluorescent light while detectives read him his rights. When shown the DNA report, he looked down, exhaled once, and muttered, "She shouldn't have screamed." That line chilled every person in the room. Outside, word spread fast. Cold case solved. News vans rolled up to the sheriff's office. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, watching the man they'd lived beside for years get walked into custody. Inside the evidence vault, the sealed envelope that had slept for 33 years was finally logged out. Chain of custody complete. Science had done what witnesses couldn't. A handful of cells trapped under a teacher's fingernails had waited through generations of detectives, through the rise and fall of technology, through the decay of memory, until one summer morning, they finally spoke. And in doing so, they told the story of who'd been hiding in plain sight all along. When the DNA hit came back in June 2025, the science was ironclad. But building a murder case after 33 years required more than a lab result. It demanded a story that could hold up in court. Detectives needed to connect the man in handcuffs to the woman he'd known only briefly, and to the night that ended her life. They started with geography. Old property records confirmed that in 1992, Robert Bobby Cates rented a small duplex on Herschel Street, 2 doors down from Dana Weller's apartment. He'd signed the lease in April of that year. He moved out in July, just weeks after the murder. That timeline was the backbone. Next came motive and opportunity. Neighbors from that era were tracked down, some still in Jacksonville, others scattered across the state. Several remembered Cates vaguely quiet, polite, the kind of man who nodded more than he spoke. One woman recalled seeing him help Dana carry groceries once. Another said he'd sometimes linger outside while she watered her plants. Back then, it seemed harmless. Now, in hindsight, every small interaction glowed like a warning sign. Detectives pulled archived phone directories and found Cates listed with a local mechanics shop less than a mile from the Riverwalk. His shift ended around 5 p.m., putting him in the area during the same window. Dana took her evening jog. They matched that to the autopsy's estimated time of death between 6 and 7. Then came the detail that tied it together. Among the old crime scene photos, one image showed faint tire tracks near the park's dirt lot. In '92, analysts had noted them as belonging to a compact sedan with worn rear treads. It was too generic to help back then, but when investigators found a surviving insurance record for Cates's car, a 1988 gray Ford Tempo, the tread pattern matched the photos almost exactly. It wasn't enough on its own, but it painted a picture. He was there. The district attorney's office joined the task force. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence chain, confirming that the original DNA envelope had remained sealed, its integrity intact through every transfer. Forensic specialists retested the scrapings under court supervision. The same result. Match confirmed. To strengthen the case, detectives dug into Cates's life after '92. They found small cracks. 2 harassment complaints from former co-workers in the late '90s dismissed but documented. A pattern of temper and fixation. A girlfriend in street. Augustine, who'd told friends he was possessive and jealous for no reason. None of it proved murder, but it added texture, a temperament capable of violence. When prosecutors confronted Cates with the mounting evidence, he stayed mostly silent. He waived the polygraph, asked for a public defender, and refused further questions. But fragments leaked out during booking. One officer recorded him muttering, "She was screaming, I just wanted her to stop." That line became the prosecution's emotional anchor. By midsummer, the district attorney announced formal charges. First-degree murder in the death of Dana Weller. The press conference drew more cameras than any Jacksonville case in years. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps as Sergeant Hanley and analyst Cantu stood side by side behind the podium. Hanley spoke first. "This is proof that science never forgets," he said. "Dana's voice has been silent for 33 years. Today, it spoke." When asked what cracked the case, Cantu said quietly, "Perseverance, and a sample smaller than a grain of salt." The story swept through Florida. Evening broadcasts ran split-screen images. Dana's smiling yearbook photo beside the mugshot of a graying man staring blankly at the camera. To the city, it was surreal. The killer wasn't a stranger hiding in the shadows. He'd been one of them, a neighbor, a face you might have passed in the grocery aisle. Meanwhile, detectives kept digging, hoping to understand why. They found no evidence of a planned attack, no sign of stalking beyond proximity. But one theory began to emerge from those old interviews. Cates may have misread friendliness for affection. Dana's kindness, the small talk, the polite smiles became, in his mind, an invitation. Her diary entry, "He came by again. I told him to stop," took on new gravity. That missing page, still unrecovered, might have held his name. Without it, they could only infer. The prosecution didn't need motive. DNA was enough. But for the detectives, motive was closure. It explained the chaos, the suddenness. It turned randomness into a pattern they could understand. Through July and August, they reconstructed the timeline minute by minute for the grand jury. Every movement cross-checked with surviving witnesses, records, and photos. The presentation lasted 4 hours. At the end, the foreman stood and said one word: "True." Cates was indicted. He showed no reaction when the judge read the charge. Outside the courthouse, a reporter shouted, "Did you kill Dana Weller?" He blinked, expression flat, and said, "She should have left it alone." That line aired on the 6 o'clock news, looping on every channel in Jacksonville. For most viewers, it wasn't just a confession, it was the first time they'd heard the killer speak. For Dana's family, it reopened 33 years of grief in an instant. Her mother collapsed watching the broadcast. Her brother called it the ugliest relief I've ever felt. As the legal wheels turned, detectives boxed up the case again, this time not as a cold file, but as an evidence exhibit bound for court. The murder of Dana Weller was no longer a mystery. It was a story heading for judgment. But one thing still hung over the room whenever they reviewed the file: that torn page. Somewhere, maybe in a landfill, maybe hidden in an attic box, a single piece of lined paper was missing, the one place where Dana might have written his name before anyone else knew it. The booking photo of Robert "Bobby" Cates ran in every Jacksonville newspaper that week. To most people, he looked ordinary, soft around the edges, tired eyes, no trace of the monster the city had imagined for 33 years. That was the unsettling part. He looked like anyone. Inside the sheriff's office, the interrogation room was cold and bright. Cates sat across from Sergeant Paul Hanley and Detective Sherry Vega, his wrists resting loosely on the table. A styrofoam cup of water sat untouched in front of him. Hanley began the way detectives do when they already know the ending. "Bobby," he said, calm but firm, "we've got your DNA under her fingernails. That's not a coincidence." Cates didn't look up. He ran a finger along the table edge, tracing an invisible line. After a pause, he said, "I told her I was sorry." Hanley leaned forward. "You told her when? On that trail? Before you hit her?" Cates exhaled slowly. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she screamed. "I just wanted her to stop." That was as close to a confession as he ever gave. He never said the words "I killed her," but everyone in that room knew what he meant. The recording ran for 1 hour and 42 minutes. He described seeing Dana jogging that evening, following her car to the park, waiting by the trees. He claimed he only wanted to talk. When she told him to leave her alone, he grabbed her arm. She fought back. He hit her once too hard. She fell. "I panicked," he said. "I didn't mean to." His voice trailed off. When Hanley asked what he did next, Cates said he dragged her toward the water. "I thought maybe she was still breathing. I don't know." Detectives sat in silence as he spoke. Every word confirmed what the evidence had whispered for years. Cates signed the transcript without protest. No tears, no outburst. Just a resigned shrug, as if he'd been carrying a secret too long and was relieved it was finally out. Later, in the holding cell, he asked one of the deputies if the river still looked the same. "Pretty much," the deputy said. Cates nodded. "Figures." When the trial began 3 months later, Jacksonville turned out like it was an event. Reporters lined up outside the courthouse. Former students of Dana's now adults, with children of their own, filled the gallery. Some wore ribbons on their lapels, purple for Dana's favorite color. The prosecution's case was tight. They opened with the DNA evidence, the statistical odds that any other person on Earth could have left those cells. 1 in 200 trillion. Then came the genealogy trail, the witness recollections, and finally, Kate's own words. The jury listened to the recording in silence. When the part came where he said, "She screamed, I just wanted her to stop," a woman in the second row began to cry. The defense had little to counter. They argued diminished capacity, panic, an accident turned fatal. But intent wasn't the hinge the act was. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. Verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. When the judge read it, the courtroom stayed silent. Kate stared straight ahead, expression blank. No anger, no remorse. Just the slow blink of a man who finally had nowhere left to hide. Dana's mother clutched her son's arm, whispering, "We got him, baby, we got him." After the verdict, Hanley and Cantu met outside the courthouse steps. Cameras swarmed them, microphones everywhere. Hanley said, "For 33 years, Jacksonville asked who could do something like this. Today, we have our answer." Cantu added, "DNA doesn't lie, it just waits until someone listens." Cates was sentenced to life without parole. He was transferred to the Florida State Prison in Ryford, the same facility that housed some of the state's most notorious killers. In his final statement before sentencing, he spoke barely above a whisper. "I didn't think anyone cared anymore." The judge looked at him and said, "They did." When the gavel struck, the courtroom exhaled for the first time in 3 decades. Outside, it began to rain light, steady, cleansing. Reporters stood under umbrellas, their microphones muffled by the sound. For Jacksonville, it wasn't celebration, it was release. The case that had haunted the city since 1992 was finally closed. But as detectives packed up the exhibits and the courtroom emptied, one question lingered, quiet but sharp as ever. That missing diary page, the one Dana had written days before she died. He came by again. I told him to stop. No one ever found it. The verdict landed like the final note of a long, unfinished song. For 33 years, the story of Dana Weller had been half told, a question without an ending. Now, Jacksonville finally had one. But closure doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like quiet. After the trial, the news cycle moved on quickly. The same stations that had once broadcast her photo nightly now folded the story into short recaps. Weller killer sentenced, decades-old case resolved. For the people who'd lived through it, the silence afterward was strange. You wait decades for justice, and when it finally arrives, you don't know what to do with the space it leaves behind. Dana's mother, Carol, didn't go to the sentencing. She said she'd already heard enough, but she watched it on television. In an interview later, she said, "I don't feel peace, I feel finished." There's a difference. Her brother Chris went back to Tampa. He told a reporter he planned to scatter some of Dana's ashes along the river, where she used to jog, not where she was found, but upriver, where the water ran clear. He said, "I want her to have the view she loved, not the one he gave her." At Riverside Elementary, the staff placed a small plaque by the front office. "In memory of Miss Dana Weller, beloved teacher, 1965, 1992. Your kindness lives in every student you taught." The current principal, who had been one of Dana's students in 3rd grade, said he still remembered her laugh, short, bright, contagious. "She made you feel like you mattered," he said. Now her name means that again. Detectives Hanley and Vega moved on to new cases, but neither boxed this one away completely. The photo of Dana from her school yearbook still hangs in the cold case office, a reminder of why they keep the lights on long after shift change. Analyst Mariah Cantu was promoted to lead the genealogy division. On the anniversary of the arrest, she gave a talk at a forensic science conference in Orlando. Her slide deck showed Dana's case file on one screen and the DNA match chart on the other. Her final slide read, "Justice delayed is not justice denied." The city of Jacksonville never built a monument, but every June, someone no one knows who leaves a small bouquet of purple irises by the trailhead at Riverside Park. The same spot where the search began. Locals say the flowers appear just before dawn, always fresh, never wilted. The rumor is that it's Chris. He won't confirm it. He just says, it's for whoever still remembers. The park is busier now. Runners returned. Families picnic again under the trees. The fear that once hollowed the community has faded into something quieter. Respect, caution, gratitude. But even in that peace, one mystery refuses to rest.